Fill your bookshelves with our recommended reads in the Richard and Judy Spring Collection, exclusive to WHSmith.
We started our journey with The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, and with Gone Girl and The Good Father, we really struck gold.
From Jasmine Nights, Dark Winter and The Land of Decoration.
We went on to After the Fall, then The Fever Tree, leaving only The Fault in Our Stars.
10 great additions to the Richard and Judy Book Club.
Just out of the picture is my son's pet Budgie. She's a cheerful soul, loves to chat, and she keeps me company. This writing space is 2 seconds walk from the coffee machine too, always an advantage.
Along the way I married a 7th generation Texan and I didn't read the fine print, and now I live in Texas. So that is my story.
From Julia Gregson to Rachel Joyce, get more great tips from our book club authors on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Richard and Judy Book Club.
Jennifer McVeigh's The Fever Tree moves us from wealth to poverty and out to Africa in a story where a woman faces some difficult choices.
Now, this book was inspired by the 19th century diary of a doctor in South Africa. More on that book in a moment.
But first, a little bit more about the author, Jennifer McVeigh.
I write because, well, with The Fever Tree, I wrote it because I just got back from this amazing trip across southern Africa, and I've been blown away by the landscape, by the dust, by this idea that men and women must have travelled there 130 years ago, and what would it have been like for them? And then I had come back and discovered this diary of a doctor who'd fought to expose a smallpox epidemic on the diamond mines. And the two together merged into this incredibly compelling story that I couldn't put down. And I found that I was sitting at my job thinking about it. And finally I decided to do something about it and begin writing. Once I had the idea for The Fever Tree, I needed to develop it. And I did this by completely immersing myself in the world of the people, the men, the women who lived in London and South Africa at the time. So I read diaries and listened to their voices, really, and they spoke to me across the years. There was a man that had trekked all the way across the desert to Kimberley simply because his cousin had made his fortune gambling on the diamond mine tables in Kimberley, and he thought he'd follow in his footsteps. He had nothing but a box of 40 cigars, and 10 years later he was the wealthiest man on the field. These were the stories that inspired me, the detail. And with Frances it was slightly harder because I felt I'd got to grips with her life in London. That was more straightforward. I read women's magazines and listened to advice on etiquette and fashion, but there were no accounts of women travelling out to the diamond mines. And it wasn't until I discovered a book of old photographs. I turned the pages and I realised there were women in these photographs on the diamond mines, mining alongside their husbands and sorting diamonds alongside their husbands. And I realised that it was all there for me to invent, that women had actually been there. And that was where Frances came about. The rich, fertile lands around Cape Town had given way to a vast desert. The Dutchman, perhaps sensing our unhappiness, kept sweeping his hands over the shimmering expanse. Zebra, he would say, enthusiastically pulling his beard. Wildebeest, impala, kudu. And she understood he must have been talking about many years ago, because in all the miles they travelled she didn't see a single wild animal, only the bleached bones of livestock by the sides of the road. There were no hedges, fences or walls to break the space, no markers of civilization to demarcate boundaries, only line upon line of dried up riverbeds choked with sand. The vastness of the landscape unnerved her. How could you tell where the civilized world began and ended? They passed cattle kraals and ostrich camps, and occasionally farmsteads. Native huts like swollen beehives were scattered across the plains. Looking out from the back of the wagon, she spotted children, so dirty their race was indistinguishable, scrambling in the dust, arms outstretched for a piece of bread or coins. Some of the Boers had built dams which had shriveled in the heat to murky, muddy pools. Bright green mimosa trees clung to their edges. The dust was everywhere. It rose in great ochre clouds from the road, obscuring the glare of the sun. It crept into every crevice of the wagon, working its way under your fingernails and gritting in your teeth. Her lips cracked in the dry heat, and when she licked them they stung and seemed to pull too tight across her mouth.
Do you like the sound of Jennifer? If you do, how would you like her book for half price with our special code?
Now here's your chance to get money off more great reads with the Richard and Judy Book Club podcast, exclusive to WHSmith. Check out the Richard and Judy collection and get any of the titles for half price with our special code. Just quote 35 10 10 55. That's 35 10 10 55 at the tills. The code's also on your screen now. This offer entitles you to purchase one of the Richard and Judy Book Club titles for half the RRP. Subject to availability, cannot be used in conjunction with any other promotional voucher. No cash alternative.
I felt a huge sense of relief when I'd finished The Fever Tree, and a great sense of achievement, simply because putting 120,000 words down on the page felt like a big deal. But there was also, I suppose, to some extent, a sense of loss. I spent all this time with these characters. I developed them, I built them, I created them, I'd grown to love them, and now I had to let them go. But there was also definitely a sense of anxiety for me. I had to send it off to my agent. She'd read the first 20,000 words a long time ago. Now she was going to read the rest of it. Would she like it? And I definitely was a little bit nervous. The Fever Tree is my first novel, and it's a huge deal for me to see it on the shelves of WHSmith. It's something I felt when I was writing might never happen. And I think it's really difficult for writers because before they've actually been officially published, they often don't have the confidence to call themselves writers at all. And you're often at parties and people say, so what do you do for a living? And you say, well, I'm working on a book and I don't know if anything's going to come of it. And it's been a wonderful thing for me to have the confidence to be able to call myself a writer and to be able to justify the confidence that my friends and family put in me when I hold myself up in the attic for a year writing my novel, and to actually know that something came of it.
The first thing that struck me about this book was the really interesting attention to detail, not boring detail, but fascinating detail of what everyday life in the upper middle classes was like in Victorian London, specifically Victorian London of the sort of the late period, about 1880. I mean, there's one wonderful bit, I mean, you couldn't make this up, where a country cousin comes to stay in this large house where they have gas pipes installed, and he comes from a house that uses lamps and candles. And what he does at night, as he should, is to blow the candles and the lamps out. He doesn't understand that if you blow out a gas lamp, just blow it out, as opposed to you'll have an explosion an hour later. And he blows it out. And luckily, somebody passing hears this and goes in and says, "You haven't blown the lamp out, have you?" He says, "Yes." And runs in and don't light a match and turns it off. That must have happened. I mean, she must have picked that detail up in someone's diary or a research book or whatever. But that kind of real attention to daily life sings through the book, and not just in London, when it moves out to the Cape, and what it was really like for these mostly very young people, you know, going out and colonising the planet. I mean, they really did it. And we can say now whether it was a good or a bad thing, but let's set that to one side. They did it, and it took enormous courage and conviction and commitment.
It also demonstrates quite starkly how powerless women were in those days. Because when the girl's father dies and leaves her, in fact, penniless, she'd always assumed he was quite well off. She's faced with the choice of going up to Manchester from London, where she lives, and accepting the post in a relative's house just as a skivvy, really, or emigrating to South Africa, where she's never been before in her life.
And marrying someone she hates.
And marrying somebody that she does know and absolutely detests. And she decides that that's preferable to going up to being a skivvy in Manchester.
Narrowly preferable. As you say, she has no choice in the matter because her father's dead. He's left these mountainous debts, which are now being settled by an uncle, I think her mother's brother. But he is the one who devises this Hobson's choice for her, and she can't argue against it. She has no power at all in the matter. There's no third way. It's one or the other, love, and you decide. And if you don't decide, I'll decide for you. And that was typical of the lot of women who found themselves in foreshortened circumstances back then. They had absolutely no self-determination at all. They had to do what they were told, either by their fathers or their husbands or their older brothers or whatever. It must have been unbelievably frustrating.
Yeah. Roll on, women's lib. Well, thanks to Jennifer and to all our authors in the Spring 2013 series.
You can watch exclusive videos on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/official Richard Judy.
And join in the conversation on our social media sites.
Tell us about your great reads and join the debate on Facebook/Richard and Judy Book Club.
Well, that's it for now. Whew. What should we do now then?
Fill your bookshelves with our recommended reads in the Richard and Judy Spring Collection, exclusive to WHSmith.
Anything else while I'm at it?
Check out whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy.
Blimey, 2 women who actually know what they want.
What was that, Richard?
Nothing, my sweet. Now, what shall I read next?
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.